I am absolutely flabbergasted that 28 years after its initial release, Live Alive has somehow come back and is out internationally for the first time. And the best part about all of this? It's still an exceedingly fun experience that is only enhanced by the HD 2D that Square Enix has been pushing with Octopath Traveler and Triangle Strategy. In fact, I go as far as to say that it might be the best showcase of this graphic style, allowing Live Alive to transcend the limits of a game from the 1994 SNES era and remain a thrilling adventure in modern times. Live Alive is an old-school RPG following the story of 8 main characters, all of whom live different lives and in completely different time periods. Each story is complete with their own gimmicks that allow each one to stand wholly unique from one another, keeping players constantly curious as to what the next one is going to be like. It's an RPG from the Super Nintendo days, and although this is a remake, from a technical perspective, the game is pretty much identical to the original. All the stage layouts are almost the same, and each of the individual story mechanics utilize the exact same concepts with no changes. With that said, even at the time, Live Alive was pretty innovative, and somehow that innovation has managed to stay fresh and fun even in current times. What has changed, however, in a massive and amazing way is the presentation of the game. While all of the sprites are visually the same, life has been breathed into all of them through shading and animation, as well as all the special effects of course being light years ahead of what they were before. The game also newly has voice acting for everyone, and holy is the voice acting absolutely stacked for both sides. Domon Kashu is the voice actor for Masaru Takahara, and wow, what a match made in heaven that is. And that's just one character. Characters talking in battle and when activating attacks makes every fight feel way more fun than they were ever before. Although stage layouts are functionally identical to the original, the new graphic style has completely remade them from the ground up, making it feel as if we're seeing it for the very first time. All the locales are almost, dare I say, kinda beautiful, making them even more distinct from one another than they were in the original version. Soundtrack has been similarly upgraded, being quite close to the original, but with its own flair added on top of it. You want my shorthand opinion of the game? If you like what you've been seeing on screen this entire time, if an old school JRPG following the actually distinct lives of 8 different main characters sounds like a good time to you, and if you were kinda disappointed by Octopath Traveler, then you'll probably love Live Alive. Even if you are someone like me who has played the original SNES version using the Aeon Genesis fan translation, this remake of Live Alive will be a wild nostalgia trip, while simultaneously feeling like a fresh new, stunningly beautiful experience, thanks to the almost ridiculous level of upgrades the presentation has received. It even comes with a complete new final boss to fight, which somehow only elevates the finale of the game. As for my longer opinion, well, let's get into that. Before I do though, let me just say that while I understand that this game is supposed to be called Live Alive, if I accidentally call it Live Alive, please forgive me. I've been calling it that way for many years now, so I'm just kinda used to it. Live Alive was originally a Square Enix Super Nintendo game from 1994 that sold 270,000 copies back in the day, which, while not the worst number, didn't compare to their much more lucrative Final Fantasy, which was raking in the cash for them. As such, it was never picked up for a translation and remained a Japanese-only release up until Aeon Genesis fan translation picked it up in 2001, allowing players from all over the world to try out this experimental gem of a game. Fast forward to early 2022, we got the sudden announcement of a Live Alive remake, which had me going, huh? Finally, on July 22nd, the HD 2D remake of Live Alive came out, and initially, I had no plans of actually getting to it right away. I loved Live Alive, but I also already beat the original, and from the screenshots, I could see that the battle system looked exactly the same as before. Still, I was curious, did anything else change? It had also been over a decade and a half since I last played it, so let's give it a shot. And let me just say, I'm happy I did, because I was pleasantly surprised by how well it stood up to the test of time just with a fresh coat of paint. The structure of Live Alive's game is unique in that it's essentially 8 separate stories combined into a single game. What puts Live Alive apart from the other multi-perspective games, however, is the fact that each one of these individual chapters are unique not just story-wise, but also through each of their own individual gameplay elements. While all 8 chapters share the same turn-based battle system for the combat, they also each have their own unique gimmicks that make each experience feel wholly different from one another. In some routes, you'll be fighting and grinding your way in a typical RPG experience, such as in the prehistoric chapter where you use the power of smell to guide your steps. Some routes completely forgo fighting altogether, like in the Distant Future chapter with Cube, where you play as a little helper robot who is thrust into a classic sci-fi horror story where he has to find the truth while escaping from a rampaging monster. In the Twilight Edo chapter, you're given the choice between doing a full mercy run or a full kill run or anything in between. There are also chapters like the Wild West chapter, which is an entire route dedicated to preparing for the final boss under a strict time limit, as the clock is constantly ticking down while you're finding ingredients for traps and items for the battle ahead. These stories don't just take place in completely different settings and eras, but also even the pacing and length of each story is unique as well. How drastically distinct each story is goes a long way in making players always interested in seeing how each character plays out. Initially, players only have access to the first 7 routes of the game, which they are free to play through in any order they like. Upon finishing the last one, they then unlock the medieval chapter with Orsted, which then leads into the ultimate finale with all of the characters. Each one of them is a celebration for a classic story that we've seen time and time again. The Wild West is obviously a callback to old spaghetti westerns, Distant Future for sci-fi horror, Near Future for cheesy mecha shows like Mazinger Z, so on and so forth. While each individual chapter isn't a masterpiece of the genre, they do a great job of telling a complete story from beginning to end. By being such familiar stories, players can easily fill in the blanks themselves and enjoy each one almost like a popcorn flick. I have a load of thoughts about each individual route specifically, but I'll save that for a separate spoiler video looking at all the chapters in the story, which I'll link in the description box once it's out and at the end, so feel free to check that out if you're interested in hearing more about that. One of the greatest strengths of Live Alive is how tight the entire game feels. While some may see it as a downside, as each story individually isn't that long, the upside is that each chapter never overstays its welcome. The gimmick of each chapter doesn't drag on, since the events of each story progresses at a fairly brisk pace. Battling in Live Alive is also a fairly smooth affair, as even the more battle-heavy stories don't require much grinding, if any at all, in order to finish the plot if you're playing smartly. What's even better is that all characters fully heal after battle, and the only resource in battle is HP. So you just have to worry about winning every individual battle as effectively as possible with what you got. Attacks are balanced not by higher MP cost, but rather by having different levels of delay, elements, and properties. It makes for an overall simpler feel than most RPGs, but fits quite well with the overall faster and tighter nature of the game. They even added in a minimap for the player, which I am fairly certain wasn't in the original, and it's pretty dang helpful, especially in the Distant Future chapter. Finally, I'll start tackling what is probably the best upgrade to this 2022 Live Alive remake, and that is the HD 2D presentation of the game and everything that comes with it. Not saying this is my personal ideal for remakes, but if we were to assume the goal of a remake is to be the absolute best version of a game while retaining as much of what made the original so great, then Live Alive is probably a perfect remake. It retains nearly all of the original sprites for every single character, enemy, and even boss in the game, only that it has fresh new life infused into all of them through shading and animation, making them look like they are living and breathing as opposed to being static JPEGs like in the original. All attacks from the original are still retained in this new one, but the newly added special effects, shading, and even voice acting go a long way in making battles feel fresh and fun. It makes seeing every single attack way more fun than they ever were before. While if you compare all the stage layouts back to back, you'll notice that gameplay-wise, they are nearly the same as the original. The massive upgrade in graphics makes every chapter feel as if it's a fresh brand new experience. Just take one look at the Twilight of Edo Japan chapter, the way the 3D effects work and how Obodomaru runs on the castle walls. It's all pretty fantastic. It's especially obvious when you look inside of the castle. Some of the chapters benefit more from the graphical upgrades than others, but they all definitely look way better than they ever had before. Out of all the things added for this remake, the biggest one, even more than the graphics, would be the voice acting. As the original was a SNES game, it of course had absolutely zero voice acting, so this remake would be the first time you ever get to hear any of these characters talk, and as this is Square Enix working on the game, holy snap is the voice acting cast absolutely stacked and oh so insanely appropriate. For the present chapter, Masaru Takahara is voiced by none other than Tomokazu Seki, and that man is yelling every single line in the exact same hot-blooded way as he would Tomokazu from G Gundam.
この俺の怒りが
For the near future character Akira, who rides a giant mecha, can you guess who's voicing him just from hearing this line? Yeah, that's right, it's the same guy who did Shin Mazinger Z's Koji Kabuto. And it might be just because I'm a big fan of these voice actors, but dang did they do an amazing job of making me love these characters all that much more. All the other characters do a similarly great job. They even got Megumi Ogata doing the grunts for Pogo, which, I guess, you know, sure. Even the English voice actors all sound pretty good. While I'm not as familiar with them as I am with the Japanese VAs, everyone I heard nailed the roles they were going for. It's kind of ridiculous just how many voice actors were part of the cast for this game. Every character having their epic lines before their final confrontations, or even just voicing every attack during a battle, is, in my opinion, what made Live Alive worth experiencing all over again. Another super interesting facet about this remake is the translation. While the Japanese translation decided to stick to what I presume to be the original script for the SNES version of Live Alive, the English translation has decided to add a tad bit more flavor to the script. This is a bit less obvious if you're listening to the Japanese voice acting for most of the chapters, but if you switch between the two in, say, the medieval chapter and the final chapter, you can clearly see a pretty discernible difference. Not saying that one version is superior than the other, but they do offer two very different flavors of voice acting and writing. I will say for the other 7 chapters it's fairly similar otherwise, but I thought it was a very interesting touch. The music in Live Alive also goes a long way in making every chapter feel unique from one another, with every chapter having its own set of theme songs, overworld music, and battle music. This is all then tied together by having one of the most kick-ass boss songs in the form of Megalomania, which plays for the final boss of every chapter and never fails to immediately get the blood pumping. Like, dang, is Megalomania a stupidly heroic song? And also not to be confused with Megalovania, which is that, you know, Undertale song. While the original OST for Live Alive already had its fair share of bangers, the remake has managed to bring that OST to a new level, having access to a much higher level of audio fidelity, and every song having that little added bit of nuance has only served to further distinguish each track from one another. There probably were some other newly added tracks for the game, but the only one I remember was the new final boss song, which is pretty dang solid. I'll be the first to say that despite me having ridiculously fond memories of Live Alive and them doing a great job with this remake, that it's definitely not a perfect game. It's not a long game by any means. I took about 20 hours to finish the entirety of it, and while I already knew generally what to do in every route since I already played the original, even a new blind player would only take probably like 5 more hours at most. Gameplay-wise, it's not that challenging either, as the entire game is kinda built to be a tight experience, which is good, but it also means that many elements are simpler than perhaps what people are used to. Story-wise, the game won't blow your mind either. These are meant to be bite-sized pieces of each genre and don't extend much further than that. But ultimately, this is one of the cases where the sum is greater than its parts. Every piece of the puzzle adds a little bit more to the overall charm that is the journey called Live Alive. On its own, each section might feel a tad bit short, but as an overall experience, it really does shine as just a dang fun time. Also, you know, unlike Octopath Traveler, it has a really satisfying and fulfilling conclusion, so it has that going for it. If you want to hear my more in-depth thoughts about the game, chock full of spoilers for every single chapter, I'll link that at the end and in the description box once it comes out. It'll probably end up being longer than 35 minutes, so I've got lots to talk about there. Otherwise, if you got anything you want to say about Live Alive, feel free to drop it down in the comments below. All the supporter stuff in the same place as always, and I'll see you later. Till next time.